Okay, so this is first ever Modular community meetings. I'm Tatiana Speisman. I will run this meeting. It's really excited to see all of you here. This meeting is to give us a better way to talk to each other. So let me talk a little bit about the logistics of the meeting. So there is this document, Modular Community Meetings, link is right here. This is going to be a single source of truth about all the information about these meetings. When attending these meetings, please be aware of Modular Code of Conduct. It's just basic rules, basically be respectful to each other, behave appropriately, take a look at this, use appropriate language. I think we solved the Zoom problem. You can subscribe to Modular Community Calendar to have this meeting on your calendar. I promise that for future meetings, the Zoom information is going to be correct. These and future meetings will be recorded and we'll publish it on YouTube so that whoever is in their own time zone or would just like to go back and watch some part of the meetings, everybody can do it. We will have an exciting agenda for today. So after my brief introduction, Joe Palmer will talk about the roadmap for Mojo. Joe is the engineering lead for Mojo project, so he is the authority on what is coming next for Mojo. And then Chris, whom I'm very excited to have here with us, will lead a discussion on what we want to see as the topics for these meetings. If you want to suggest a topic, please just type it in the document. Everybody has the commenting rights. You can type the suggestion here, and then I'll include it in the meeting. And the last thing, please use, for questions, please either raise your hand or type your question in the Zoom chat, just say like questions, and then I'll read it for the speaker. Any questions on logistics? Okay, with that, I'm very excited to hand it over to Joe to talk about what's coming next for Mojo.
Hey, thanks so much, Tatiana. Let me just share my screen here.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Cool, can everybody see what's going on over here?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, thank you. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everybody. And let me just actually jump in and say I am not the authority on what Mojo does. I think we all have some agency and influence here, and I think if anybody takes a kind of a meta point home from today, that should be it. Like, and consider this meeting like the first step in like a long journey of us trying to kind of bring all this together and move to a more transparent, inclusive way of designing and landing this language that we're all very invested in. But again, thank you so much. Going to talk a bit about Mojo and like what the near future holds for it, specifically version 24.4 and beyond. And by that, I mean, if folks aren't familiar with our current versioning and planning structure, at Modular, we tend to try to deliver monthly releases. And the version of Mojo right now, 24.4, is based on that. But on the Mojo team internally, we tend to also plan in terms of like quarterly milestones. So what I'm going to talk about today is, what we have coming in the release coming up very soon, and then also really how that ties into the current milestone that we're in and how that tees off what we want to do in the future and how we can all kind of come together to help make that happen. As I'm going on, since there's so few of us, please feel free to kind of ask questions. I can't currently see the hand tool, but I'll count on Tatiana to raise that. And folks from the team too, feel free to jump in where appropriate. All right, sound good? Excellent. All right, so moving on. If you're wondering who this clown is, I'll just briefly introduce myself. I'm Joe Palmer, manage the Mojo team here at Modular. Today actually marks my 3-month Moduversary or whatever, 3 months at the company. Before I was here, I was at Meta for a long time doing various ML and language stuff, and my career has mainly been about doing programming languages, compilers, machine learning. Worked on a lot of like very early V0 languages, been very lucky to do so over the years. So being here is like super exciting to me because it just ties together a bunch of other threads from my career and a bunch of things that I've been really passionate about. And I'm just stoked to be here talking about Mojo in that respect. Um, so today, though, for this presentation, I really just want to focus again on like what's keeping the Mojo team busy right now. You know, because like if you think about 24.4, if you look at the timing of 24.3, we should be getting pretty close to that. We've been hustling and working pretty hard to kind of keep the journey going. And so again, I want to talk a bit about like what we've been up to as a team, what we're planning over this 3-month arc, and potentially like where we could use some feedback and maybe, you know, give you the benefit of a heads up on. So when we think about the priorities right now for the spring and summer, this current milestone, it really, the work that the team is doing is really informed by kind of like 3 objectives. Like one is to land, you know, quality of life, or as we call internally QOI, quality of implementation and architectural improvements in the compiler. I'll touch on this in a moment, but basically when, you know, I think I'm having worked on a bunch of languages like this and, you know, of this vintage in the past, like I think Mojo is actually in really good shape for a language and implementation that's as young as it is. But I think all of us having used it know that there are some rough edges, some features that are still in flight, some places where we don't have it all quite figured out. And a big objective for this current release or this current set of releases is just for the things that we do know how and what to improve to start landing those things so we can build off to bigger and better, you know, objectives. I'll talk about specifics in a moment, but you can kind of think of this as like a very big, like under the hood cleanup release and us kind of like moving the pieces into place for various features that aren't quite finished yet, but we want to get finished soon so we can start building on top of them. The second set of objectives that inform our priorities have to do with just Max. Like, you know, Max is obviously a very big deal to us. You know, for those who aren't familiar with Max, it's sort of the AI engine that we're also building here at Modular. And that, you know, we're principally building using Mojo. And, you know, we internally get a lot of the benefit of Mojo specifically in building Max, but, you know, reciprocally, we get a lot of design prioritization and feedback from the teams building that, writing kernels, doing actual like AI development using these tools. And that tends to heavily bias our priorities in such a way. So you'll kind of see that coming up a bit as well, where it's like, why do we choose a lot of the features that we did? Why are we doing some of the work that we're doing? Because we need it ourselves. And we're sort of in some respects kind of like hitting some of the rough edges and, you know, sort of blank areas of Mojo like first. And that's why we're kind of planning the way we are.
Well, and then
But
just to throw in,
yeah.
one of the major differences between Mojo and Swift, when I was working on that back in the day, and Joe and others also worked on, was it was built in secret with no customer. And so there was nobody actually using it in any significant way up until then it launched. And then suddenly lots of people tried to use it in anger or not in anger, but in delight. But and so this is something that's very different with Mojo. And I think it's a
Totally.
very good thing. I'm very, very happy about that.
No, I mean, again, totally. I'm glad you made that point because like that's why I think we're in the shape that folks might disagree on the call, but I think that's why we're in the shape that we are. Because like in a previous life, I was like one of the people behind TypeScript. And I think one of the things that we did right on that project was that like basically from day 0, we had users. And like we were bootstrapping the compiler in TypeScript as well, but like from the team that went on to build what was the core of VS Code, we had like enormously important and influential feedback coming at us all the time. People exercising the tools in ways that we weren't and thinking about problems differently. And it's like, I think when you're developing or designing a new language, it's critical to get those different points of view in play. And I think like internally, we're lucky to have that. And already from what we can see, touching on this third point from the open source community, I'm already seeing this take shape as well. Because like, you know, one of the ways that we're also really lucky is that in comparing to Swift, like we're opening up a lot sooner. You know, Swift, I think it was like almost 18 months before we open sourced and everything was very much about, you know, how we could support that ecosystem. But here it's like we're getting great feedback from you all, from the community. And I think that's also feedback that reflects on the needs of the language and tool chain in ways that we wouldn't use it internally, specifically like outside of the ML AI domain. And we can touch on that a little bit later, but for our objectives right now, like a big area that we want to kind of keep driving and improving and supporting y'all is sort of making sure that community is as healthy and robust as it possibly can be. Because like we obviously see, you know, like bigger opportunities for Mojo than just in the context of modular or Max, and also outside of the domain of just ML and AI. And it's cool to see people sort of pushing it in that direction as well, especially as it relates to Python and some of the other incumbent ecosystems. Any questions on any of this so far? I know this was a fair bit of inside baseball, but I just wanted to kind of frame this a little bit if folks were curious why we're choosing to do what we're doing when we're doing it.
Well, kind of the point of this meeting is to share inside baseball.
Fair enough.
break down inside baseball.
Cool. Okay, again, I can't see hands raised, so Tatiana, I'll count on you to interrupt me. And please feel free to, if anybody's on the call, feel free to unmute and interrupt if you can. Otherwise, yeah, just hit me up. Okay, so getting more specific about quality of life improvements, I've touched on this a little bit already, but again, like we're not, I want to kind of avoid the whole version 1 or 1.0 framing for Mojo. I don't think that's necessarily constructive. This is always a, it's always a journey, right? But I think if you like, you look at where Mojo is already and like, you can kind of see that it's like, there's areas where we're way ahead of where you'd normally expect us to be, and other areas where like, because we were moving so fast, we might be a little bit behind, and depending on how you use the language, you might be hitting some of those rough edges. Like we certainly, again, as I was saying, are hitting them ourselves. So this release 24.4 and kind of looking ahead the next couple, if you're expecting flash or big language features, you wouldn't necessarily be disappointed, but the emphasis is really more on like what's going on under the hood. Like, again, there's work that we knew we needed to do in the compiler, things that we learned to do better or differently. There's also new language features that as we sort of, in the process of integrating them and adopting them ourselves, we learned more, wanted to tweak the design, also wanted to tweak the implementation to follow. So
Hey,
as we
Joe,
look at 24.
can you give you like a concrete example? Give a war story of something that's happened over the last month or two, and because
Yeah, so you know what? I'm just going to skip ahead and do that. So let's talk about async. Like, so basically, it's like, and we could also talk about life. Of course, if you want to talk about lifetimes or other things as well, but
well, so
essentially,
I guess the thing. I mean, I'll channel my inner Jeff here. The challenge working on Mojo is because it is very advanced and very obscure low-level ways. You have to you're charging forward with one goal, but then you realize you have to go solve something completely unrelated. And so you end up having, and we have this goal of actually building it the right way. So it's not just about like enable a demo and have some rocky path that sort of kind of looks like it's tempting but doesn't really work and you fall off the path. We're trying to actually build the right underlying infrastructure. And so one of the things about Mojo that's pretty funny is that in Mojo almost everything is a function call almost. And so function calls and mechanics, argument conventions, parameter packs, variadics, async, which is what you're about to get to. Like all of these things like need to be right, but when they're right, then everything can build on top of it. Sorry, Joe.
No, that's great. Because like as someone who's myself new to this code base, that's not like, for instance, I like doing a patch, I had to modify the signature type last week and then felt how much work it was to do that. But like how ubiquitous some of these concepts were. But I think one of the things, like, because other languages are kind of playing in this space right now. And I do think that it's like worth kind of talking about how like our implementation and the philosophy we bring to the implementation is also one of the facets of Mojo that makes it unique. And this isn't a marketing, talk, but it's something I'm learning firsthand and like pretty powerful. Where like essentially like the way that we layer on top of MLAR dialects and how I've found that like working in this code base or thinking through problems in Mojo, it's like you have to kind of like, you're not just thinking in terms of one language, you're kind of thinking in terms of a composition of dialects that can mean that sometimes you have to kind of do a lot more work, frankly, to sort of thread everything through. But then once you're able to do that work, I think you're also able to benefit from like the unique advantages of each one of those dialects, specifically in terms of like optimizations. So I think like for those of us working in the code base, it's like, it's a lot, but I think that the end result, like what we get out of this ends up being much more powerful than we would have gotten otherwise if we were to kind of cheat, like using a VM or different implementation techniques. And then also I think it forces us to kind of think through some of these problems a lot more rigorously than maybe we would have, in like another environment. Like for instance, like got to talk about async, like in the hack programming language, which I worked in at Meta, we were able to kind of punt on a lot of problems because it was like, from a language perspective, because like, oh, the runtime will handle that. But then that just left, sort of like open design questions lingering for a long time that we had to wait for the, kind of like solve down the line in ways that would break code, specifically around like order of evaluation or things like that, which I think in our case, like we have to kind of think about things deeply and upfront, but that means a much more stable and I think robust design, like right off the bat, which is why it takes longer. Jeff?
I just want to double click and plus one your point there. I think that I've joked that Mojo is a language designed by compiler engineers, and like functionally speaking, it kind of is. And part of this, like, layering of dialects and MLIR means that you're really forced to think about what is the core abstraction of like the thing that I'm building in the language, because you have to write that, right? You can't just you don't code gen all the way down to like LLVM or something right off the bat. You think about like what is the real like core abstraction of what I'm building. And so for async, right, we went back to the drawing boards, like what is the actual like fundamental abstraction, and expand on that. And that's really powerful. It's good for compile time. It's good for architecture. You can draw a nice diagram and explain how things go from point A to point B in the compiler. So it has lots of benefits.
And I promise this wasn't supposed to be like an MLR marketing presentation, but yeah, because like I also say it's like there's pros and cons to this, right? One thing I'll leave on it, because this ties right into my next point, is like I do think, there's I've worked on a lot of different compilers over the years, and like there's different sort of schools of expression, right? You start to see patterns develop, and like for instance, if you work on a compiler for a functional language, like regardless of which language it is, you tend to find that the data structures and sort of architectures tend to be very similar. And in turn too, I do think that there's like, two fundamental schools of this kind of compiler design. Is like more of a bottoms up approach where you tend to sort of structure and architect the compiler in terms of like the layers beneath it, in terms of the abstractions that are maybe lower level. And I've noticed that's more common in sort of the LLVM ecosystem versus the other kind where you tend to go more top down, like starting from like the language constructs itself and then sort of, worrying about lowering and solving those problems independently as you go. And so for me, this has been an interesting exercise because I had some exposure to that in Swift and Clang, but like kind of coming here and seeing that approach or philosophy really taken far with these MLIR dialects has been like, again, a lot for someone like me to try to adapt to, but I think it's super powerful.
Well, and one of the things that contributes to that is with Mojo, we really want to make it so that it's as few concepts as possible that give you the power, right? And so other languages, for example, Swift, ended up into this kitchen sink of special case things that continually got added and added and added and added. And so I think that some of the places we're happiest in Mojo is when we can subtract something. And so if you can have one fewer thing, that's actually the better sign that you're on the right path. And so I think that causes a lot of, it makes very abstract, very hard work, but it's a very different design premise versus trying to say like, look at all the cool things we have in our toy box, which leads you down this path of complexity.
Well, kind of like teeing off from there, like let's take async as an example of all of this, where we have a language feature that we shipped, we implemented over a year ago, but we know that it needs some work. And it's like, it's basically not fully baked yet. And it was funny to me because like when I was putting these slides together, I'm like, oh, let me just go grab some async code from our samples. And it's like, wait, we're not really using it. And it's like, okay, let me kind of dig through like some other projects, like for some things. And it's like, it's not really there or manifest. It's like the code I'm showing right now, I just kind of grabbed like lightly modified from one of our internal testing suites. But basically, I think everybody can agree that like, on the one hand, like in the year 2024, like async await like provisions for asynchronous behavior, that's like a table stakes like language feature because it just generally plays into a lot of other concepts that you'd want to implement in a modern language. I think for us though, it's sort of like we were fast to get there, like we had the right tooling to make it happen. But then because we had to turn our attention elsewhere, basically we let the design and implementation lag a little bit behind the other facets of the language. And because we weren't using it heavily ourselves yet, it's sort of, I'm not going to say it's atrophied or entropy is taking place, but like we know we need to do some work to update it. And this was something where we got a lot of feedback internally that, okay, it's time to go in and make some of the improvements that we always intended to. Specifically, just to kind of talk about like what's motivating this, like for instance, async hasn't really evolved at pace with like the lifetimes implementation or design that we currently have in the language. So it's kind of like rough to use with our current ownership model. Performance is lacking. I think like in terms of how it's actually used, more often than not, you effectively get more synchronous behaviors. Like it kind of like it allows you to model your code in a way you normally would using an async, like a more monadic way, but you're not getting the real benefit of asynchronicity. Also, we're not doing a lot of the low-hanging fruit when it comes to classical compiler optimizations for like async await. And again, that has led to us having like very incomplete or kind of very little integration of async in our own libraries. And as I kind of did a quick look in the community, I didn't see much as well. But we see a lot of potential benefit for this in the code that we're writing at Modular using Mojo. So it felt like now was the time to move ahead and actually make some of these improvements. So kind of bringing this back down to
Joe, are you going to talk like concretely why we care about async?
So if you, I'm about to touch on it, but feel free to kind of jump ahead.
No, I don't.
You know.
I don't want to interrupt your flow.
No. This is
Like,
my
you're allowed to
ramble.
map to concrete things and say.
Well, okay, let me talk a little bit about, so specifically though, like in terms of why we want async, I'll just kind of jump ahead. Like one is that we do see opportunities for like Mojo as like a great kind of server-side programming language, right? Like we're writing like a lot of our own services layer in this. We're trying to kind of, dog food as much as we can, move off of Python. And like, this is a key language feature for writing like server-side services layer software. Like you need async and you need async IO to do that right. The second thing is that as we start to look towards the GPU, there's also, it's a different kind of flavor of async, but you essentially, like you're you're moving stuff across the bus a lot of the time, you're waiting a lot of the time, like a lot of CUDA APIs are, like kind of just sort of like remedial async in design. And like, we see a lot of opportunity there to really innovate on the language and library level if we're able to implement something that was also sufficiently extensible. So like we have these like, in terms of like modern uses of async, we have these two big motivating factors. One is the more classical one, like I'm writing server-side software, IO bound. Hey, this is a great new environment to be, using language for that, but we need to improve. The second is as we move into the GPU or heterogeneous compute space, it's like it goes hand in hand with async design as well. But in both cases, we really need to kind of improve the status quo of what we have. Chris, is there anything you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly. I'm just like map it from async is valuable, and it's like server-side programming, GPUs, even GPU kernels are asynchronous within themselves.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So bringing this back down, okay, like this is supposed to be about 24.4, 24.5. What can you expect? So like for 24.4 and 5, again, it's about the under the hood pieces, right? Because the language feature is there, you can use it, you're just not getting the benefit of it. So looking across like the next couple of versions, like one, plug the feature gaps. So in terms of like memory only types that have been introduced since async was originally implemented, and also all of the like great work Chris and others have been doing on the lifetime side, like make sure that all of this works with async functions. So just on the pure language level. Two, under the hood, kind of go back in and reassess our code generation strategy for async and make sure that like we're choosing the right approach there for the tools as well. Like just to nerd out for a sec, there's generally speaking, there's two classical approaches to implementing this in a compiler. One is a more continuation passing style, another is more state machine based. LVM, thanks to Swift, C++, other implementations have opportunities for both. And we're going to kind of switch over, utilize more of the state machine work, generates less object code, have higher performance, just a lot easier to manage. Also have a new compiler IR model so that for async in terms of both how we intend to implement the code generation strategy and how we also want to utilize it for the graph compiler, which shares some of the underlying infrastructure, we can allow that to happen. Even though we're kind of maybe switching to more state machines also, we're not leaving coroutines behind. We're improving our coroutine implementation and doing some standard library work there as well to support that. And then also finally going through and implementing a lot of those table stakes compiler optimizations that I alluded to in the past, like the very basic stuff that you would expect to happen for an async await implementation. Looking a little bit further ahead though, like as we think past, okay, like once we have the actual implementation stabilized, we have a lot of design work ahead of us that we're going to need to do, like once we have a reliable language feature. And some of this, we have some really good ideas. We're talking a lot about it internally, and later on when we talk about a call to action, we can get into where maybe you all could help. Like some problems that we want to think through after we have this language feature implemented, for instance, are like, what would like a nice new async IO subsystem look like in the standard library? And then once that's in place and the language feature is in place, how should this manifest in Max itself, both again from a GPU perspective and in terms of like a model serving perspective? There's a lot of cool stuff that we could do with this clean slate approach. Like we want to think through that. Finally, something that's always sort of like lingering out on their horizon is Python interoperability support, where, async await, it's like very high profile in Python. Python, despite the more conventional syntax, does have some idiosyncrasies that we need to contend with given our model and given our sort of how we handle things in the runtime. So how are we going to bridge that gap from a language perspective? How are we going to make sure that, again, in the interest of being a pure and proper superset of Python, we can make sure that you could work effectively across the two environments? These are problems we've yet to solve, and we could use your help with that. So moving on to some other things that we're doing in 24.4, just again, in the interest of fit and finish and, kind of things that would be compelling to you folks as these new releases land. Ownership and lifetimes continue to improve. For instance, late breaking, I think, Chris, you landed this yesterday, but one noteworthy improvement will be that arguments to def declared functions will now change to borrowed by default and then copied on mutation. So you don't have to kind of sprinkle the borrowed keyword everywhere, like no need to do it explicitly. in our own sample code, it's already been kind of like really nice to watch the ripple effect happen on that. We intend to land a lot of performance improvements, both in terms of performance of the compiler, thanks to some fixes and changes and how we do marshaling of caching of object code, and also in terms of what we're doing for how we're interacting with LVM compilation, specifically per function LVM compilation. So basically higher quality code gen that plays better with MLAR and some of the optimizations we might want to lift up the compiler stack, as well as just basically going ahead and doing some of the work to kind of improve like Mojo compilation speeds more broadly, so that we can get closer and closer to a more like, interpreted interactive style of development. You won't have to pay as much of the cost of static compilation. You could, feel free to kind of write Mojo code as if you're writing Python.
Yeah, a lot of this is like just like Weiwei's been working on getting LVM to behave.
Exactly. Yeah, which is
LVM's a great thing, but it's also an old thing, and so just getting it to behave correctly in a newer language model, I think, is a challenging bit of research as well.
Totally. No, props to Weiwei for slugging through all this. This has been rough, but it's like we're already seeing the light at the end of the tunnel here. Also, something I do want to call out as well is performance improvements in the standard library, specifically around dictionary. Like, one thing that we've noticed across the board is that when folks are porting Python to Mojo code, or they're doing Mojo work, against various benchmarks, like one of the limiting factors was just performance of the dictionary type. Again, we were moving very fast. We were kind of trying to get this thing into place, and we noticed some very simple and straightforward improvements we could make that would radically improve, like, I think, insertion and read performance on dictionaries. And already we're kind of, so.
Yeah, I think Maxim is the champion here, right? I mean, he's.
Oh, Matt, was that you? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I only saw, so thank you very much for that. Very much appreciated. I'm sure everyone else will appreciate it as well.
Yeah.
Then also kind of moving forward a bit, metaprogramming. So this is an area where we have made a bunch of kind of little tweaks to, how the elaborator works, how the programming model is for parameters. Jeff, you just landed in, or you're in the process of landing in FRID parameter types. But I'm just really happy with all the work that's been going under the hood there in terms of how we use it. It's meant that, it's just been a lot more stable, a lot more predictable, a lot faster. So a lot of great stuff going on there. Again, starting with going back to what Chris said earlier, we're using this tool ourselves. We're hitting a lot of the rough edges ourselves, and we're trying to kind of work through it in ways that we think would also benefit you all. Also, just a few more things to run through here. Better error messages, again, sophisticated type system. There's going to be some stuff that's, going to kind of raise some eyebrows. So we're working through them as we hit them. Debugger support, super happy with some of the improvements that we're landing in 24, 4, and 5 as well, that you'll start to see, specifically around starting to kind of make moves towards allowing for GPU debugging, and just general goodness coming from a lot of the work the team's been doing on improving both our LLDB integration and also emission of debug info. Just the quality of debugging over the last few versions just has been shooting up. I don't know if anybody saw the Euro LLVM talk that Billy and I believe Walter did, but it's just been great stuff coming out of there that I think folks will generally really appreciate. And then with an eye to the future, we're going to start also enabling REPL debugging. So for those of you who are working mainly out of Jupyter notebooks or using the REPL, it's just going to be a whole new world. And again, getting to that more interactive style of development, but without paying the cost, that's really an implicit goal of the team. And I think we're making really good progress towards getting there.
Yeah, well, so this is one of those hidden things of being trailblazers, right? Because I think Mojo is the first real MLIR-based programming language, and so MLIR didn't really have debug info support and things little details like that, and so so it's a lot of work to be able to get these very simple things to work, but when they're missing, it's just really painful. So
no, totally. And Billy, Walter, others, if you want to jump in here, but also just generally, if we start to look at GPUs, well, that's a totally different debugger tool chain. And, all the little idiosyncrasies and differences between, say, GDB, CUDA GDB, LDB, start to rear their ugly head. So, and I think this is also, debugging is generally an area where modern programming languages tend to punt. You have you've got the C# and everything of the world, which rely on the runtime to get a good experience there. But I think that the state of the art for debugability in general across modern programming languages is generally pretty poor. And I think this is something that right from day zero, we've taken pretty seriously, and we're putting a lot of time and energy into making it great. And we're just going to keep pushing there. Couple of little nice to haves, deprecated tag. Oh, Walter, yeah.
Oh, yes, just to share some more information related to debugging. So we are focusing on LDB for CPU debugging, also CUDA GDB for GPU debugging. But the approach that we are taking, and that also Billy, he's the one that does most of this work, is that we are trying to enhance the MLIR debugging infrastructure so that all of the improvements, or most of the improvements that we make there, end up being useful for both GPU and CPU debugging. Like we are not trying to do like very specific flows for each one of them. And yeah, I think this will pave the way for other hardware debugging features in the future.
Sweet. And then, sorry, I just noticed I've been running really fast through all this. I do want to make sure we have plenty of time for the Q&A with Chris and others, but if anybody's raised any questions or anything, Tatiana or others, feel free to ask.
Okay, and we'd like to leave
Okay.
like maybe 15 minutes at the end to just have a community discussion, right? So,
Okay. As long as just stop me at any point. Again, I'm like flying here, so I just want to make sure folks are having an opportunity to ask. Just one thing I do want to touch on though, then as I wrap up this part is just deprecations and removals in the next version. So two things to just sort of make sure that you all are aware of. Let will finally be gone. So this is something we've deprecated, and we've sent the message out over prior releases. Just make sure you plan accordingly for that. Second, so it shouldn't be a surprise, but again, break and change. Second thing though is we intend to deprecate the tensor type in the standard library in 24.4 with an eye towards removal very soon after. Tensor is an interesting case because on the one hand, it's very high value and utility. Like, you build a language and an ecosystem in this domain, you're going to need a tensor type. But the other side of that coin is that it's sort of like jack of all trades, master of none. Like, no matter how you're using tensor, there's probably a better way to be using tensor, a better way to be approaching that problem. And also, if you're going for high performance, tend to be more domain specific. And we have much better solutions, both like in the Max runtime side of things, and also in sort of the graph APIs we're working on, and as well as coming from the community itself. So it felt like having a tensor type in the standard library with how it's being used and the deficiencies that it has was actually maybe causing more problems for the ecosystem than it was worth. So we intend to remove it in favor of these other approaches. So Chris, I don't know if anybody else wants to kind of add any.
I'd also just say Tensor was really super early. I mean, it was one of the first demos we did, really, and then it accumulated a whole bunch of stuff that wasn't super great. Like, you got a mishmash of different math methods and stuff like this. And so I think that we should, just like Python doesn't have NumPy in the standard library, NumPy is a separate package. I look at it as the same way. Tensor's super important, but I don't think that the standard library should bless one opinion about this. And anybody who wants it, of course, can just take the code and copy it into their project or do whatever they want. But I think
we intend to.
Yeah, I think to your point, the question is really about how do we get an ecosystem that can work together. And if you have different, if you have the standard library lick the cookie on Tensor, it just makes it a little bit hard. Yeah.
I mean, I know Joe, if others want to kind of jump in about this, but yeah, there's always that balance with the standard libraries too, where it's like, where do you add value versus where do you eliminate opportunity? And I think, again, a tensor type's a good example of something that feels like a no-brainer, but at the end of the day, it's like, it's so critical to whatever you're building, then that more direct and specific approach often tends to, get you further. And then in terms of the actual tensor type itself, so we will be deprecating, as Chris just said, we are going to make it available. So, it shouldn't be too, like, we encourage you to update your code to better approaches, but if you're absolutely dead set on using this, you'll still be able to use it. But it's the kind of thing, again, where like, bear with us. We're trying to kind of create opportunities for the ecosystem while also focusing on the things we know we can do best. And I think this is like going to be indicative of that sort of work in the future. Sorry, Joe, anyone else want to add anything there?
Yeah, there is a question here, right? I'd like to read it to everybody. With tensor being deprecated, will the current implementation be open source somewhere? And does this also include TensorShape?
So it will be open sourced. I believe we'll make it available.
It already is, right? I mean, it's part of the standard library. It's all
or like we'll see. Yeah.
It's not, unfortunately, right now. That's a closed source package. Tensor, yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
I think that. Sure. Yeah. Plan of record is that we will make it. We'll host it somewhere. I can't speak specifically to TensorShape though, if that's part and parcel of that or not. Joe or Chris, do you?
I don't know. I think the plan is
Yeah.
we'll get this figured out with the next release,
Yeah.
that will be deprecated, and so this is something we need to get going. We don't want to. If you go back to the goal is get it out of the standard library, like just because it doesn't really fit there. But then we're not trying to like break anybody that's built on top of it. So
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't looked at the specifics, but we'll definitely do our best to make sure that we're not burning people and make it available. And that will likely have to include tensor shape because of its relationship with tensor, but we'll have to dig into it a little bit.
Yeah, it's TBD. Feel free to reach out on GitHub and let's talk about it though, or in Discord. And yeah, but yeah, like Chris said, we don't want to break anybody, but we feel like this is putting our best foot forward. So I did want to touch on, because just, was one of our priorities, support for Max. I don't have a lot of specifics to say here right now, but just again, since I listed the three, I wanted to say like a lot of the team's work right now is really focused on making sure that Max is like going to be the best platform we can possibly build. So, just to reiterate, the priorities, the needs, and everything is informed by our own use of Mojo. And I'm just keying this off here because I do think getting a bit deeper into Max, especially coming off of the tensor discussion, like why we feel so strongly about Max, or about Max's approach to this work, the new APIs that we're introducing, everything. I think this would be a great topic of conversation for a future meeting and presentation if folks are interested in it. So I just wanted to leave that out here now. Like with all the work that we're doing in Mojo, like we're not trying to make Mojo like a DSL or a scripting language for Max, but because like, that team is our key users and this is the domain the sandbox are really playing in, it really is important to us to make sure that like these two things can be mutually beneficial and improve each other. And that's a big reason why we choose to prioritize what we do.
yeah, and I would also say like getting GPU support launched in Max is a really big deal for Modular. We want to do something very meaningful and help move the state of the art forward here. But that's also really hard. And so it's driving a lot of this obscure, low level, weird stuff. But Mojo on GPU is going to be wild, right? I mean, it's super exciting. We can't wait to get it out there. And so it's coming soon, not to tease y'all, but it's going to be a really big, very exciting point for Mojo in general. So that'll be great.
Finally, talking about the open source community, you folks. So again, like, I just want to say first and foremost that like the amount of kind of support, attention, participation we've gotten from the community has just been awesome. Like I've been around this block a few times and I just haven't, knock on wood, like I haven't seen it kind of go as well, or sort of, it's been a lot of work, but sort of be as nice as it has been this time. Like last night, for instance, and also the participation is kept up. So thank you. Like, so I was like looking at the repo last night and, over the past month, over 100 PRs have come through with a third of them accepted. And, a third, 30%, it's like in terms of batting averages, that's pretty good. But like in terms of open source projects, especially one that like gets the amount of attention that we do, I have to say that that's actually a really good stat, because normally you do this kind of thing, you get a lot of kind of pull requests and stuff that are maybe sort of either less well considered or more working towards a specific agenda, and then you maybe 5% might make its way through. So for a third of them to come through, it means that really like you all are really locked into what Mojo is, you're looking to add value and you're actually doing it. And you can even see that in the contributions that you all have been making and what we've been getting. Like, like for instance, like all of the core types in the standard library are better now for these contributions. Like again, the dict work that's been going on, performance and things like that. It's not just like fixing typos in the documentation, but actually digging deep, helping us fill out the story, especially when it comes to say Dunder methods, Python compatibility, things like that.
And reverse can reverse a thing.
Yeah, right. Like,
yeah.
like serious like improvements that like improve everybody's quality of life. That's awesome, because like you see like how we are focused like what we're focused on, but there's a whole big ecosystem out there, people using the language and the tools in ways that we currently aren't, or that we're not able to, and you folks are kind of like filling in those gaps, so thank you. So just two things. One, like, I just want to call
I'm gonna
attention
jump in. I'm gonna jump in
Yeah,
real
Joe.
quick, Joe, if that's okay. Sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt.
yeah, go
Before
for
we
it.
get to the bugs, I just want to correct the PRs. We're actually way above that. You can't just look at open PRs and closed PRs and merge and all that on the open source
Okay.
repo now that we use Capybara. Like I just looked at our
okay.
stats internally. Like right now it shows that we closed 122 PRs since we started using Capybara, which was 3 weeks ago.
Oh,
and so we've
okay.
we've merged 122 PRs from the community just in the last 3 weeks.
Okay, cool.
And right now we have 69 open PRs. So like the numbers are crazy good.
Oh man. Okay. So first of all, apologies. Second of all, that's
No,
awesome.
you're good.
Like great. Like, so we're at 2/3. That's awesome. No, but still, it's like again, and like just watching these things go through, the quality and sort of just ambition is just great. So please keep it up, keep pushing, keep, working with Joe and the rest. I'll talk about that in a moment about how we might want to approach design moving forward. But just this is something that we really want to encourage because I think we're all benefiting from it. And I just want to say thank you first to keep filing those bugs. Like, it's actually helping us a lot again, because we're getting signal that we wouldn't normally get, and we are prioritizing these fixes. And to that end, our nightly builds are now a lot more nightly. So you should be starting to see these fixes flowing back to you very soon. So just thanks for bearing with us on all this. Thanks for the participation. And yeah, this is something that's really important to us. And to the best of our ability, we want to keep, encouraging and supporting.
Okay.
So now, finally, before I wrap up, just looking forward real quick. So I wanted to kind of tee off some other things or topics or just sort of, like things to think about for future meetings. So, and also kind of with an eye towards what are we going to do after, this current milestone of Mojo. So some things to consider discussing. One is like open design questions, proposals, things like that. I know that many of you want to hear about Python interrupt, for instance, and that is something that we do plan to kind of be a lot more explicit and open about our plans there, especially in the very near future. But it's also the kind of thing that, again, with how you folks are using the language and what we're doing, we could use the input and the back and forth and some collaboration there. And it does feel to me like a meeting like this is an ideal place to sort of have some of those discussions. Sorry, Chris, you look like you're about to say something.
Well, I mean, the only thing I was going to add is that don't mistake us as knowing all the right answers.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, just like the borrowed argument thing, for example, is a consequence of, I think this is the third approach on it. And so like defs now work. I mean, it's really cool. I don't know if the nightly's gone out yet, but it's cool because it's better for Python compatibility, so it's as good for Python compatibility. It's better for performance. It's better for predictability. And now it works with non-copyable types, right? And so but this was the third approach to solving this issue. And so sometimes you need to be able to implement something, live with it for a while, get feedback from all sorts, and then realize it's not great, and then come up with a better idea and iterate. And so I think that many of these things, we want to get Mojo done ASAP and get it done as soon as possible. And like we all want it to be done and here and build on top and stuff. But on the other hand, we want it to be great.
Yeah.
And so this iteration process, I think, is super important. This is where I think open discussions and feedback are really valuable.
Yeah, because there's places where we definitely see potential for the language, again, like from like the server side, outside of the ML domain, but we're just not getting as much signal yet. And for you folks who are actually doing the work, come back to us, let's talk. And this goes same for async IO libraries. It goes also for more advanced type system features that we know we want to implement, or that we're already starting to see the need to implement. But for these sorts of things, again, like we don't necessarily have all the answers. We're approaching things from a different perspective, and maybe in some cases more closed perspective, and more transparency, more open discussion. I think it'll benefit us all, and that's why I'm excited about these kinds of meetings. And these are the things we're hoping to tee off here. Looking ahead to max GPU support, again, like what are we doing here? Why are we doing it? How can that help you all? How can you help us? More things to discuss. Also, outside of the language, I'm sorry, I'm rushing a little bit now. I want to make sure there's plenty of time, but tooling, for instance, like we're already hard at work on, looking into the space of build and package management, but we know that's something that you all are hungry for and can really benefit the community, especially from we talked about tensors, right? Being outside the standard library, but we want to release these things. What's the right way to do that? What's the right way to play that into the ecosystem? Like how much is too much there? And finally, calls to action. So, there are areas where like we know we might never within Modular have like the right kind of skills or expertise to handle well, but are critical for the ecosystem, like data, for instance, like data libraries, Panda workalikes. How do we differentiate ourselves from Python using sort of the advantages of Mojo? These are things that I think you all, like the community, is uniquely situated to solve. And it's something that, again, an open discussion can lead to much better outcomes for everybody. And on that note, speaking of open discussion, I just wanted to point to the auto dereference proposal. So we've already started kind of landing some of this stuff in the repo, and we just encourage more discussion there, and take it to Discord, take it to GitHub. But like, we want to start doing more design and conversations out in the open, and take more feedback as well. And hopefully, as we progressively open up the language in the ecosystem, we can sort of converge on doing all this together.
Yeah, I mean, this is one where actually don't read that link. I'm working with another contributor, Nick, who unfortunately this is like the exactly wrong time zone for him, but it's getting rewritten. So it's going to be another very major take, and I think it's way better, actually. So
right,
still
don't read the link.
The same design point in terms of the macro design point is the same, but the actual way it fits in the language is way better.
Yeah, so ignore that, but at least keep your eyes peeled for more proposals. And we do want to take more things to you and work with the community on these things. And also if there are aspects of the language design that you're hungry to see improved, or if you are curious about, feel free to reach out to us and let's have that conversation and try to do the work together. So on that note, I just want to thank you all for the time. Sorry if I ran a bit over. I tried to rush through. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk about it and get the team in front of you all. And thanks again. Next up, Chris in the Q&A.
Okay, thank you, Joe, so much for the insighted presentation. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Chris to run a little bit of a community discussion and Q&A.
Yeah, so I mean, if you go back to our goal here, right? Our goal is we're trying to open up Mojo over time, and we're on the one hand focused on getting much stuff done. On the other hand, we don't want to be super myopic and narrow-minded, and so we're trying to figure out how best to engage with people in different ways, while also being bandwidth limited. And so the idea of this meeting is that we could get together and we could talk about kind of stuff we're doing, but we'd also love to host and highlight other stuff going on. I'm curious what y'all have seen have worked in other similar things. If you've done similar things before, or what you'd like to have, or what kind of content is useful. Like, does anybody have any ideas or thoughts on this?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I think the what happened today with like what you said about getting rid of the inside baseball and kind of opening up some of those doors for people is really helpful. I think that's a good idea to start all the meetings with those and give us an insight of like what's coming up, what are the goals and ideas. I think that the potential future topics I'm seeing are really good too. I just think these should be a way of kind of connecting the inside and outside of Modular and Mojo to kind of unify the ideas and goals. But yeah, good meeting.
Cool. Gabriel?
Yeah, sure. This is coming as a contributor perspective. I don't think that we would want this meeting to become some kind of like stuff where we discuss technical implementation and stuff. I think that it would be great to have a dedicated meeting for contributors and maintainers to be able to talk about technical stuff that don't impact Mojo users. Stuff like how to actually work inside the repo and stuff like this. Especially, I'm thinking about from what I learned on the discussions in GitHub, it seems that regularly inside Modular there are meetings about the standard library and just discussing issues and stuff. And if that doesn't contain any confidential stuff, like confidential information, that would be great to have those like completely open. If that would be good for you, because then it would mean that a lot of subjects would be discussed outside these kinds of meetings that are more for users, Mojo users.
Leslie, what do you think about
that? Yeah, I think we should do both. I completely understand where you're coming from, Gabriel, and I think it is absolutely necessary for the standard library to do some of these discussions externally. At the same time, the standard library team is also working on a lot of internal stuff. And so we need that sort of safe space where we can just, speak our minds and discuss those things without having to worry about how we phrase it. So I think we can get to a compromise here where we sort of do both, and I think we're all gonna be happy with that.
Yeah, I don't think much that we're working on is actually secret. It's just messy. The creation process is actually messy, and so
yeah, it's not about being secret. It's more about like there are some things that we might want to discuss that are very related to some of our proprietary stuff, and it's just much easier if we have a platform or a meeting where we can do that. And we will try to exercise best practices to try to do as much of it as possible in the open as we can to involve you all. But I don't see a reason why these have to be mutually exclusive.
Yeah, there's another challenge too, where I mean, we've talked about this before, where we don't really want design by committee, and there's a lot of these things where we end up with very nuanced trade-offs where making a decision, even if it's wrong, is better than not making a decision. And so, we're just talking about the def argument thing. Like, we made the wrong decision, but it's fine. We did something, we lived with it, we understood why it was the wrong thing, now we're changing it. And we're very excited about that. And having epic debates about everything is not really the right thing to do, particularly when you're early into the development of something like this. And so, but that said, I mean, I think that some of these things we could definitely do an experiment, try that out, and see how it goes. So, any other thoughts? So one thing I'd love to do is have presentations from other folks. I'm curious if any of you would be interested in giving like a talk about some of the work you're doing. For example, we could take a 15-20 minute talk and have use slots where you can talk about the cool things you're building, also the lessons learned, also the challenges and pain points and things like this. Yeah, Benny, we'd love for you to talk about Basalt. And so, I mean, one of the things I've seen with these community meetings is that if you set the presentation bar really high, then nobody wants to participate. But if you are, hopefully you can tell we put some work in preparing some slides, but it's more of a discussion. It's more of a ad hoc. It's not like a keynote presentation or something like this. It's more of, we're trying to be open and here. Then we can get more participation. We can have a more ad hoc, agile schedule. We're also thinking about doing this, for example, like every 2 weeks-ish, something like that. Do people feel like that's a reasonable cadence to get going? And we can, if we do that, then what we can do is we can actually figure out the dates ahead of time, and we can sketch out and say, hey, if somebody's interested in talking about something, I don't know what, I'm not a dates person, by the way, but if the next one was like June 3rd, we could pencil in some agenda items for the next time, if there are things people would love to see. And then, and I don't know, Benny, if you'd like to give like a tour update, something like that. But also we could sign up a rough agenda, and then because it's an organic thing, if it turns out that we're not ready day of, we can always push things out and reschedule and try again later. Does anybody have any specific requests for a 2 week out-ish thing?
Yeah, you can just suggest in the doc, guys, if anybody would like to see.
Yeah, you can
just type there.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. And if we should figure out how to give people who comment edit access. I don't know if that's possible somehow.
It is possible, and not sure I can do it real time, but I'll do it after meeting.
Cool. Yeah. And so if you add comments, then we can grant access. We don't want to make it open to the world edit access, but if you if you do that, then we can just give you direct edit access. So that would be cool.
So Joshua had a couple questions in the chat.
Okay, so Josh was asking, like, how do we pay for Mojo, basically? So let me be very clear and very direct on this, is that Mojo is really expensive. This is not none of these fine engineers working on Mojo are actually doing this as a charity.
Out of the goodness of our hearts.
Yes. I mean, I think that I'll speak for myself. Many of us love what we do, right? But you also have families, and you have to feed your kids, and you have to whatever, right? Pay your rent. And so Mojo for Modular is not a product, right? Mojo is a technology that we build on top of. And just like we were talking about before, Max and some of the AI and accelerator and GPU and other stuff like that ends up being a product. Now, even that is going to be massively open and public, and we'll talk more about that later. So I'm not going to spoil everything, but we want to see Max go everywhere. And so what Modular is doing just in general is it's saying, okay, well, let's build a business. Let's also catalyze a ton of really cool, innovative development and community and everything else. And so I'd love to see Mojo go everywhere. And Modular's not trying to monetize GUI libraries or web servers or any of this kind of stuff. And so let's go build the world, and there's kind of a green fields of software that can be rethought here. And we'd love to see that happen. And that's not directly, it's not like a modular product. We're not going to sell your GUI library or your thing, right? But but it's good for the community in general. And so we'd love to see that develop and build out. And so now a lot of people get confused because they say, oh, well, Mojo's not open source. That's more control issues and wanting to not have design by committee and things like this. That's where that's coming from. This is why we're taking this approach, progressively opening things over time.
Yeah, if I could jump in on that too, because like two things, since my presentation had a lot of stuff about Macs and things, I want to be unambiguous. Like, on the one hand, it's like, yeah, like we work for Modular, like Modular uses Mojo heavily. Like we have to be, as the Mojo team has to do a good job of supporting the company and the product, because that's again, like what allows us to do this in general. But, and I have to be unambiguous about that. But on the other hand, it's like we do have bigger aspirations for the language. And we also want this to be like, we believe in what we're doing. And we want this to be a true and meaningful tool to a lot of different people for a lot of different reasons. So the best of our ability, we do mix in whatever we can. But this is why I keep saying, like, we're counting on this relationship with you all to help things go further, because like we do have, what we need to prioritize just in order to kind of keep this thing rolling, but we do want to go bigger, and we need to work together on that. Second thing is just to elaborate on Chris's point about open sourcing. I mean, like, again, like Swift was like 18 months before we open sourced it. C#, I mean, like the real C# was like,
whoa, no. Swift was secret for 4 years before it was even launched.
Yeah, I just mean like,
and then it was 18 months before it was open source.
Yeah. I just meant from a WWDC to that release. I remember it well because my son had just been born. So like, but like,
mine too, actually.
But yeah, all right. So, but like, but it takes a while. And C# also, the real version was like a decade, I think, before. So it's like these things take time. And to Chris's point, it's like you need to kind of balance like that desire to get feedback and help with also sort of the understanding or the ability to really direct the design of something and to edit. And so we're walking that line here, but like, we've all done this before. You can see like the proof is in the pudding. Like everything we've always done is eventually found its way to open source. We just need to kind of make sure we do it the right way at the right time.
Yeah. And also the other thing is we're a small team. But Sora, did you have a question? Otherwise, we'll get to Joshua's questions.
Oh, yes, I have can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, yes. I have a question.
Great to meet you, by the way.
Yeah, great to meet you guys as well. Okay, so here's the question. Maybe because I joined late because I misremember the time. Well, what's the relationship between this meeting and the community live stream? Are we going to do this instead in the future, or because well I think Benny said, well, there might be a presentation about his machine learning library. Is that more fitting to the community live stream than this, which feels more like a discussion forum or a design meeting kind of thing?
Great question. Chris, do you want to take it?
Yeah, so I think that's a fantastic question. And when we thought about what we wanted to do with like the Mojo community meetings, this was very much focused on community efforts and like sharing and collaborating with you. I think that the live streams have largely been I almost want to say like a marketing type of event. And so typically we run them the week after we have a release so that we can talk directly to the community about the sort of things that have come up that are new in Mojo, that are new in Max, and kind of do those demonstrations there. And in many ways it's been, more of a communicating out, where the purpose of this was to invite this meeting is to invite collaboration and communication amongst the community members. And so, I could see spending some of this time talking about, how we're thinking about packaging, right? That could be a longer discussion and, something that we want to talk about. Or maybe somebody has decided that, hey, I really want to take on building something that looks like Pandas for Mojo. And this would be an amazing venue to be able to talk about those sorts of things, where the live streams are more about, communicating to a broader audience of these are the things that are landing in Max and these are the things that are landing in Mojo. So it's a subtle difference, but think of it as this meeting is much more collaborative.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the live stream ends up being very one way from whoever happens to be live streaming, and then this is more of a discussion.
Yeah, and I hope people who are present in this meeting just can see the difference, right? This is much more about talking to each other than what you can do when live streaming from YouTube.
Yeah.
Then sorry. Yeah, then I guess the scoping should be a little different as well, right? In terms of inviting community presentations, because we probably want the things presented here more related to the open source effort of Mojo itself. Like, well, this part of this open library that we can potentially port to become part of the standard library, like the compact dict work Maxim did or something like that, right?
Yeah, so
Or,
I mean, well, so the other thing I would say, like, we have to figure this out, so let's see how it goes. And this is an experiment also, but a discussion here, I think, or a presentation on Basalt, for example, here could be much more of like, here's what I'm doing, here are the problems I'm having, here's some challenges I have, what do people think about X? Versus like the live stream would be, here's Basalt, it's totally awesome, it solves all these problems, go use it this way, right? And again, there's kind of a difference between the discussion aspect and the helping make Mojo better versus here's a highlight on one thing, and it's about the one thing. But we'll figure that out. We're just at time, so maybe we can do lightning round stuff really quick, and just we can come back to these things. But so Joshua, you're asking about traits. I don't think these are in the next month or so timeline, but I would love to get some of the stuff in the summer kind of time frame. I don't know if that's possible, but right now the async stuff and some of the compile time work ends up being the priority. Mojo package, I don't know if there's a lightning round answer to this, or does anybody know about Mojo package here?
Oh, I can quickly just say what I said. I think the actual question is how's the Mojo packaging story going to fit in with other language ecosystems, right? And I think the answer here is that if you have a Mojo package or project, it can depend on like Python code or in the future C++ code, and these aren't going to be put into Mojo package files. That's just the way Mojo code gets shipped around. But then Brian already posted some kind of a notification to the community about the Mojo project manifest that's being developed, and that will have like ways that you can integrate Python and C++ code into your projects, but they're not going to get shipped around with Mojo package files. They'll get shipped around Python by source, C++, maybe also by source, but a lot of this stuff is still being developed. So yes, we are going to integrate with other language ecosystems, but it's not going to be through Mojo package files.
Yeah, okay. Also super lightning round. So Benny, you're asking about AutoTune package. This has been deprioritized right now. Just it's a thing that got in the way for technical reasons, and so we moved out of the way. We need to come back to it.
Auto-tuning is coming back soon, actually.
Okay, well then it's coming back soon. That'd be great. Maybe that's a discussion for next time, is what's going on with auto-tuning, and then some of the testing framework test plans. Maybe that can be another good topic for that. So, okay, we need to call it. This seems awesome. I see lots of excitement, so that's fantastic. Please do add comments for suggestions for topics up here. And so if you have bigger things you want people to sign up for, just add to the potential future topics. And it's helpful if you tag it with your name. You don't have to, but that's helpful. And if you want to sign up, so Maxim, awesome, you're signing up to talk about compact dict. That's great. And Benny as well. And then we can ask a modular person to talk about auto tuning or whatever else, and then we get a nice mix of topics. So wonderful. Well, thank you, Tatiana. Do you want to close things off at all?
Yeah, just want to thank everybody for joining us today. Please suggest future topics. If you explicitly add your Google ID, that makes it a little bit easier to add you and give you an editing right. It's a shared document with the community, and looking forward to seeing everybody here again in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Super awesome. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.